Security supervisor Leon Garrett thought he had seen it all in 14 years at the Rideau Grand Hotel in Ottawa. He thought the man in the worn canvas jacket, carrying a single duffel bag and no luggage trolley, was lost. He thought the calm, measured way the man asked for his reservation was the rehearsed confidence of a grifter. He thought the whole situation would be resolved in under 3 minutes, with the man escorted back through the revolving doors and onto Colonel By Drive. He was wrong, catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. Within 2 hours, Leon Garrett would not have a job, a pension, or a single person in the hotel industry willing to return his calls. This is the story of what happens when arrogance mistakes dignity for weakness. The first Saturday of November in Ottawa carries a particular kind of cold. It doesn't announce itself the way a January blizzard does. It seeps. It comes through the seams of your coat, through the gap between your scarf and your collar, through the soles of shoes that were perfectly adequate 3 weeks ago. The Rideau Grand sat on the corner of a street that funneled that cold directly through its revolving entrance, so that every guest who walked in brought a breath of winter with them. Colonel Théodore Asante-Brempong walked through those doors at 4:47 in the afternoon. He was 49 years old, solidly built, with close-cropped grey at his temples and the kind of posture that didn't come from vanity, but from 3 decades of standing at attention. He wore civilian clothes, dark canvas trousers, a quilted jacket in faded olive green, and a pair of clean but unremarkable boots. He carried one bag. He had driven himself from Ottawa in a government pool sedan that he had parked in the visitors' lot without asking for valet service, because Colonel Asante-Brempong did not consider himself a man who required fuss. He was in Ottawa for a closed-door briefing at National Defence Headquarters. The following morning, after which he was to fly to Halifax for a command review. He had made a reservation at the Rideau Grand 6 weeks prior because the department preferred it, because it was 3 blocks NHQ, and because his aide, Captain Simone Trebelsi, had handled the booking as she handled most administrative details, with meticulous efficiency. What Colonel Asante-Brempong did not know, as he crossed the marble lobby toward the front desk, was that Leon Garrett was already watching him. Garrett stood near the concierge station, arms folded across the chest of his charcoal security blazer, the gold Rideau Grand crest on his breast pocket catching the chandelier light. He was 51, a thick-necked man from Brockville, with 17 years of hotel security behind him, a level of seniority that had curdled over time into a particular kind of territorial certainty. He had decided within seconds of watching Colonel Asante-Brempong come through the doors that the man did not belong in the Rideau Grand. He couldn't have explained the reasoning precisely. He would later try, in an interview room, and find that no explanation sounded any better than the one that was true. Garrett intercepted him before he reached the front desk. "Excuse me, sir." He didn't say it the way the bellman said it, with a slight forward lean and an open hand. He said it the way a man says it when he means stop. "Can I help you with something?" Colonel Asante-Brempong turned to look at him. His expression didn't change. "I have a reservation. I'm going to check in. Your name?" "Asante-Brempong. Théodore." Garrett made a show of checking the iPad he carried. He had not actually looked up the name. "I don't see anything here. You'll find it under the Department of National Defence block booking," Colonel Asante-Brempong said, his voice even. "You may also want to try the spelling. ASANTE-BREMPONG, sir," Garrett said, leaning on the word. "This is a 4-star property. Our rooms start at $420 a night. I want to make sure you're in the right place." There was a pause. The lobby continued around them. A couple in matching cashmere checked in at the far desk. A porter wheeled a luggage cart across the marble. The fountain near the entrance made its constant, indifferent sound. "I am aware of the room rate," Colonel Asante-Brempong said. "I have stayed here before." Garrett studied the canvas jacket, the single duffel bag, the sedan, which he had watched arrive on the exterior camera feed, which was not a town car, not an Escalade, not anything with a private plate that signaled the kind of money Garrett used as his measuring stick for belonging. "I'm going to need to see some identification before I can let you approach the front desk," Garrett said. The word "let" landed in the air between them. Colonel Asante-Brempong looked at the man for a long moment. He had been in the Canadian Army since he was 20 years old. He had served in Bosnia, in Afghanistan, in Mali. He had sat across tables from people who actually wanted him dead, and he had kept his voice level. He kept it level now. You are asking me to produce identification before I am permitted to walk to the front desk of a hotel in which I have a reservation. It's standard procedure for... It is not standard procedure, Colonel Asante-Brempong said quietly. I have checked into this hotel 4 times. No one has ever stopped me in the lobby. Garrett's jaw tightened. Behind him, the junior security associate on duty, a 23-year-old named Patrick, had gone very still. Patrick had been at the Rideau Grand for 4 months. He had never seen Garrett do this. He had seen Garrett do plenty of things he didn't like, but not quite this nakedly. Sir, I can call the front desk manager to assist you if you'd prefer, Garrett said, recalibrating slightly, not backing down but finding a new angle. But I'm going to need to verify that you have a legitimate booking before we proceed. Call the manager, Colonel Asante-Brempong said. Please. Garrett got on his radio. He spoke quietly, but the lobby was not a noisy room and the words drifted. Unverified guest, lobby, possible issue. Within 90 seconds, the front desk manager appeared. Her name was Isabelle Fontaine-Roy. She was 34, sharp, and had been managing the front desk operation at the Rideau Grand for 6 years. She knew the D&D block booking. She knew it very well. The moment she heard Colonel Asante-Brempong's name, she felt a cold drop in her stomach. Colonel Asante-Brempong, she said, moving past Garrett to offer her hand. Welcome back. I apologize. Is there a problem? Your security supervisor, the colonel said, without looking at Garrett, stopped me in the lobby and informed me that I required his permission to approach the front desk. He then asked me to produce identification before speaking with your staff. Isabelle Fontaine-Roy looked at Garrett. Garrett kept his face flat. Leon, what? Wanted to verify the booking, Garrett said. Protocol, that is not protocol, Isabelle said, her voice low. Colonel, please come with me. I will have you checked in immediately. Your room has been upgraded to a suite, and I'd like to personally apologize for any inconvenience. She shot Garrett a look that was not quite a command but was close. Garrett watched them walk toward the desk. He told himself he had done his job. He told himself this. He did not know that Patrick, standing 3 feet to his left, had been recording on his phone for the last 4 minutes. Patrick's name was Patrick Ossi Mensah, and he was the grandson of a Ghanaian army officer. He had grown up with photographs on his grandmother's wall. Men in uniform, men standing straight, men who had earned every gold thread on their shoulders in conditions that most Canadians could not have imagined. When he watched Leon Garrett stop a black man in an expensive lobby and tell him he needed permission to walk to a front desk, something very specific happened in Patrick's chest. He kept filming. Colonel Asante-Brempong checked in. Isabelle Fontaine-Roy personally escorted him to the elevator. The room, a corner suite on the 11th floor, overlooked the canal. His uniform, which was hanging in a garment bag inside his duffel, was untouched. His reservation, which had been made 6 weeks in advance on a government account, was in perfect order. At 6:14 that evening, Patrick posted the video on his personal account with 4 words as a caption. This is not okay. He had 200 followers. By midnight, the video had been viewed 340,000 times. By the following morning, it had been embedded in the Ottawa Citizen, shared by 3 MPs, and flagged to the communications office at National Defence Headquarters, which was already fielding calls from CBC. Colonel Asante-Brempong learned about the video from Captain Trebelsi, who texted him at 6:52 a.m. Sir, you need to see something. He watched it on his phone, sitting in the corner suite, in the grey Ottawa morning light, still in his uniform jacket from the previous night's review of briefing materials. He watched Garrett's posture. He watched his own posture in response. He watched the moment the word let had landed. He watched Isabelle Fontaine-Roy arrive and how quickly she understood what had happened. He put his phone down on the window ledge and looked at the canal. He had a briefing in 2 hours, a classified agenda, 37 years of service, and a career that was not defined by this kind of event, by lobbies and security guards, and the exhausting arithmetic of proving himself in rooms where he was not expected. He had learned a long time ago that the energy spent being angry in moments like this was energy taken from things that actually mattered. But his son, Kofi, had called him at 7:03 a.m. Dad, I saw it. Are you okay? And his daughter, Naomi, had texted at 7:11 with a message that consisted entirely of his name, followed by 17 question marks, which was how he knew she was upset. He was fine. He was going to his briefing. He was going to fly to Halifax. He was going to do his job. because his job was why he was in Ottawa, and his job was what mattered. But when Brigadier General Sandra Pelletier-Voss, his superior officer, and the convening authority for the briefing, called him at 7:28 and said, "Ted, I have seen the video and I need you to tell me what you want to do," he understood that the decision was not entirely his to make anymore. "What are my options?" he said. "Formally, you can file a complaint with the hotel's parent company, which is headquartered in Montreal. You can speak with my office, and we issue a statement. You can let the public response do the work and say nothing. Or," Pelletier-Voss paused, "you can let me make some phone calls." There was a brief silence. "Let's start with the hotel," he said. By 8:15 a.m., the Rideau Grand's regional vice president for operations, a man named Etienne Bouchard, was in the hotel's boardroom on the second floor. He had driven in from Gatineau. He had not slept well. He had a printed transcript of the video in his hand, which his communications team had prepared, and which he had read 3 times on the drive over, each time finding it worse than the time before. Garrett was also in the building. He had been called in for an early shift and told, by the general manager, Claudine Marcotte, that his presence was required for an operational review. He was sitting in his office near the service entrance, still in the blazer with the gold crest, drinking coffee and operating under the impression that this was a meeting about a guest complaint, the kind that got written up and filed and forgotten. He had managed complaints before. He had not yet seen the video. He did not know about the 340,000 views. He did not know about the MPs. He did not know that Etienne Bouchard was upstairs reading a transcript of his own words, with the expression of a man swallowing something very unpleasant. The meeting, when it came, was not the kind Garrett had expected. Claudine Marcotte was 58 and had been running luxury hotels for 25 years. She sat across from Garrett with the stillness of someone who had made a decision before walking into the room and was now performing the formal courtesy of telling him what it was. "Leon," she said, "I'm going to ask you to walk me through yesterday afternoon, specifically the interaction with the guest who arrived at 4:47. Garrett walked her through it. He used words like protocol and verification and due diligence. He used the phrase maintaining the standards of the property, which he had used before in reviews and which had always landed reasonably well. Claudine Marcotte did not take notes. She let him finish. "Leon," she said, "the guest stopped is Colonel Théodore Asante-Brempong. He is a senior officer in the Canadian Armed Forces, with a command position at CFB Petawawa. He has stayed at this property 4 times on D&D accounts, totaling approximately $9,000 in revenue. He has never had an incident of any kind. His reservation yesterday was verified in our system at the time you stopped him, which means your statement that you could not see the booking was incorrect. The interaction was filmed by a colleague and has been viewed, as of this morning, by over 600,000 people across social media. It has been shared by elected members of Parliament. It has been reported in The Citizen, on CBC Radio, and by the Associated Press in a wire brief that ran overnight." She paused. "That is what happened," she said. "Do you have anything to add?" Garrett's coffee cup was in his hand. He set it down. "I was doing my job," he said. The words sounded different than they had in his office 40 minutes ago. "You were not," Marcotte said. "You stopped a man because of how he looked. You told him, and I am reading directly from the transcript now, that you would need his identification before you could let him approach the front desk. In 14 years you have never, to my knowledge, intercepted a guest in the lobby and required identification before permitting them to check in. The word 'let' is particularly notable, Leon. You are a security supervisor, not a gatekeeper." Garrett said nothing. "We are terminating your employment effective today," Claudine Marcotte said. "You will be provided with a formal letter. HR will process the relevant paperwork. Your personal items will be collected from your office and brought to reception. I'd like your pass and your radio." She placed a small envelope on the table between them. Garrett looked at it. 14 years of the gold crest and the charcoal blazer and the lobby where he had known every corner and every camera angle, and now the envelope sat there like a period at the end of a sentence. He took the pass from his pocket. He unclipped the radio. He put them both on the table. He did not pick up the envelope. He left without saying anything else. Upstairs in the boardroom, Etienne Bouchard was on a call with the Colonel's office. He did not speak with Colonel Asante-Brempong directly. The Colonel was, by that time, already in the NDHQ briefing room with his phone in his breast pocket on silent. Bouchard spoke with Captain Trabelsi, who was composed and precise, and who conveyed that the colonel's expectation was straightforward. An institutional response, not a personal apology to the colonel alone, but a public acknowledgement of what had occurred, and a commitment to concrete change. Bouchard gave it. He had no leverage to do otherwise. The statement the Rideau Grande released at noon that day did not use the words misunderstanding or unfortunate incident, or we take all concerns seriously, which was the standard buffering language that corporate communications teams reached for like a reflex. Claudine Marcotte had killed that draft herself. The statement said, plainly, a member of our security staff stopped and questioned a guest on the basis of his appearance. This was wrong. The staff member's employment has been terminated. We are conducting a review of our security protocols and contracting an independent firm to assess our practices. We are deeply sorry to Colonel Asante-Brempong and to anyone who has experienced similar treatment in this or any of our properties. It was not a perfect statement, but it did not hide. At 2:34 in the afternoon, Colonel Asante-Brempong walked out of NDHQ into the thin November sunlight. Captain Trabelsi met him on the steps with a coffee and a rundown of the morning's media inquiries, which numbered in the dozens. "What would you like to do, sir?" she asked. He took the coffee. He looked at the street. He thought about Kofi calling at 7:03. He thought about Naomi's 17 question marks. He thought about Patrick Ozzie-Mensah, 23 years old and 4 months into a job, who had filmed the video and posted it and understood exactly what he was risking in doing so. "I want to make a statement," he said, "but not about me. The press briefing was not at NDHQ, and it was not arranged by the Department of National Defense as an institutional matter. It was Colonel Asante-Brempong, in uniform, standing in front of a single microphone outside a community centre in Vanier, with Captain Trabelsi one step behind him and no one else on the steps. He was asked if he felt vindicated. "That question assumes this was a personal conflict," he said. "It wasn't. What happened to me in that lobby has happened to men and women, with no uniform to eventually produce, no government account to trace, no brigadier general calling in the morning. They don't get a video that reaches 600,000 people. They get a note in their file about a guest complaint. What I want people to understand is that what happened to me is the least of it. I was inconvenienced. Other people are harmed." He was asked about Leon Garrett. "I don't have anything to say about an individual man," he said. "I have things to say about the systems that make it comfortable for individuals to behave that way without expecting consequences. Change the system. The individuals will follow." He was asked what the army would do. "I am the army," he said simply, "and I am standing here. That is what the army will do." Patrick Ozzie-Mensah was not fired. He had resigned voluntarily the morning the video went up, anticipating termination. Claudine Marcotte called him 3 days later and offered to reinstate him with a promotion to Senior Guest Services Associate and a written guarantee of no reprisal. He thought about it for 2 days. He took the offer. He told his grandmother about it on a Sunday evening call. She was 81 and living in Kumasi, and she listened to the whole story without saying anything, and then she said, "Your grandfather would have said, that is exactly what a soldier looks like in civilian clothes." Patrick cried a little after he hung up. He didn't tell anyone that part. The investigation that followed Leon Garrett's termination was not limited to the one incident. The independent firm that the Rideau Grande contracted spent 6 weeks reviewing security logs, incident reports, and camera footage from the previous 3 years. They found a pattern. Garrett had made 17 documented stops of guests in the lobby in that period. 14 of those guests were black or brown. Of those 14, 11 had DND or government accounts, meaning their bookings had been confirmed in the system at the time of the stop. Garrett had, in 11 cases, performed an unnecessary intercept of a confirmed guest and provided no security justification in the incident log that would meet the property's own written standard. The report was provided to the hotel's corporate ownership, to the Ontario Human Rights Commission, which opened its own file, and, at Colonel Asante-Brempong's specific request, to the Canadian Council on Diversity and Inclusion in Hospitality, a body that had been advocating for exactly this kind of systematic audit for 4 years, without anyone in the industry taking it seriously. They took it seriously now. 3 months after the lobby intercept, the Canadian Hospitality Association, under considerable pressure from both the public response and the threat of regulatory attention, announced a mandatory unconscious bias and anti-discrimination training protocol for all security staff at member properties. The protocol was not perfect. The advocacy organization said so publicly and said it was a starting point, not an end point. But it was binding, and it was auditable, and it had teeth. Colonel Asante-Brempong did not attend the announcement. He was in Halifax, completing the command review that had been delayed by 2 days when the Ottawa situation kept him on the ground longer than planned. He read about the announcement on his phone at a coffee counter near the base, and he thought, good, start somewhere. There was one conversation that never made the news. 6 weeks after the incident, Garrett sent a letter, not to the hotel, not to the media, not to a lawyer. A letter, handwritten, on plain paper, to Colonel Asante-Brempong's regimental office at CFB Petawawa. Captain Trabelsi received it in the mail and read it before forwarding it to the colonel, with a note that said simply, "Your call, sir." The letter was not eloquent. It was the handwriting of a man who had not written a personal letter in a long time. Big uneven script on 3 pages, smudged in places. Garrett wrote that he had not intended to discriminate and that he knew now that intention was not the point. He wrote that his wife had sat him down, the night after the video went public, and shown him the numbers, the 11 confirmed guests, and that he had not had an answer when she asked him to explain them. He wrote that he had a son, and that his son had not spoken to him since the video, and that this was the part that made it real in a way the termination hadn't. He wrote, "I don't expect anything from this letter. I'm writing it because I needed to say it somewhere, and you're the person I need to say it to." Colonel Asante-Brempong read it twice. He put it in the inside pocket of his uniform jacket, which was not something he did with correspondence. He did not write back. He did not need to. What he did do, in the spring, was agree to be keynote speaker at the Canadian Council on Diversity and Inclusion in Hospitality's annual conference in Toronto. He wore his service dress. He spoke for 22 minutes without notes. He talked about the lobby, but briefly. He spent most of the time talking about his father, who had emigrated from Ghana in 1971 and worked as a hospital orderly for 6 years before qualifying for his nursing credentials, during which time he had been mistaken for a janitor, a patient, and twice a visitor, never once for the nurse that he was becoming. He talked about his father's composure in those situations which had seemed, to a younger Théodore, like passivity. He understood now, he said, that it was not passivity. It was the discipline of a man who knew that the energy required to be furious in every lobby and every hallway would leave nothing for the operating room. He talked about what that discipline costs. He talked about how it is paid, generation by generation, by people who should not be required to pay it. He ended by saying, "I don't want my children to be as patient as my father was. I want them to walk into every room in this country and be seen for exactly who they are before they say a single word. That is not a radical request. That is the minimum, and it is long overdue." The room was quiet for a moment after he finished. Then it was not quiet at all. Colonel Théodore Asante-Brempong walked back to his seat, accepted a glass of water from a young man at the end of the row, and sat down with the same posture he always had. Straight, composed, and entirely, undeniably present. He had walked into a lobby one November afternoon with a duffel bag and a government reservation and the bearing of a man who expected to be treated with basic decency. A security guard had decided that wasn't enough, and in trying to diminish the colonel, Garrett had done the one thing the system had always gambled on people not doing. He had made it impossible to ignore. The system gambles on that every time. It counts on the quiet. It counts on the dignity of people who have learned, at great cost, to absorb these moments and move on without making trouble. What it cannot count on is a 23-year-old with a phone who knows exactly what he's watching. What it cannot count on is a man who, when asked in front of a microphone whether he felt vindicated, looks into the camera and says, "This was never about me. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in accountability, real accountability, not just apologies but actual change, subscribe to Voices of Courage. Because these stories are not rare, they're just rarely told."